I think we'll go ahead and kick this off, just being respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to be moderating today, so you'll probably hear very little from me after this because I've got an amazing panel with us today. But just kind of to introduce this session here, right? We've got these AI tools and they're continuing to grow in capability and availability, but that gives UVU and really universities at large this challenge of developing clear and adaptable policies. So finding this, this balance between a centralized rigid policy that risks limiting academic freedom, stifling innovation, but then on the other hand, if we leave all decisions to individual instructors, it can create a little bit of confusion and inconsistency for students. So the goal of this panel today is sort of to explore ideas on how UVU can navigate this tension. How do we balance structure with flexibility? Respect faculty academic freedom while ensuring clarity and fairness for students, and how can we support both faculty and students in using AI intentionally, effectively, and ethically. So those are some of the things that we're going to kind of engage on today. So I'm going to let Chris and Marilee do a little brief. I'm sorry, I got to be closer to the mic, I think. I'm supposed to remind you also, if students, if you're here and you need to get credit for attendance, that there are QR codes on the back of the chairs, and then there are also some, as you can see them throughout the room on the wall. So make sure you scan those and mark that you were here. And then I'm going to have Chris and Marilee do a brief introduction. Then Chris actually prepared sort of a robust introduction as well. And so we're going to turn the time over to her after the brief intros.
So brief intros
Yep,
first.
brief intros first.
Hi, I'm Chris Weigel, and I teach philosophy here at UVU.
Hi, I'm Marilee Larson. I'm Department Chair over Health Sciences, and I teach in, right now, health coaching. So that's fun.
All right, so I'll get started. I wanted to start out, first of all, just by saying, well, thank you to Brian and the Center of the Study for Ethics for inviting me, but just also that I feel so fortunate to be able to raise some ideas that I've had in this setting where we have not only people who are administrators, but also faculty and students together. And I think that, I'm lucky just to be able to talk with you, but also because the ideas that I have today are just one perspective. I'm putting them forward tentatively. I don't really know the answers to these questions, but I wanted to give like a solid proposal just as a jumping off point, and I know that I'll get a lot of really great feedback, I have no doubt. So the title of the talk is In Praise of Caution, Values for Policy Development at UVU. And just one quick disclaimer, I have no experience in policy development and virtually no experience in administration. So feel free to, those of you who would have to like actually make this happen if it were going to happen, feel free to keep that in mind and throw things if you wish. So because it's easy to sort of put forward these ideas if you don't have to think about how to implement them. But I am very curious if they are implementable and what are some of the potential drawbacks. So Evelyn already talked about this a little bit, but the challenges for policy she posed to me, and I really appreciate that because that helped my thinking quite a bit, that we have these three questions. How can we balance the rigidity of centralization versus the inconsistencies of decentralization? So on the one hand, we could say everybody has to do it this way, but that'd be quite rigid. But we could also make it a free-for-all. That might be a problem also. How do we think about policy while preserving academic freedom? Which is another really great question. I'm a faculty member. I don't want to be told how to teach my courses. I feel like I went to graduate school for so long in part so that I could have this freedom, and I don't want that taken away. And then how can we give clarity to students and help faculty be intentional in their AI use? And I want to try to address all of those questions. Like I said, I might not be successful, but it's an attempt. So as I thought about this, I thought, well, maybe a good place to start would be to think about what our guiding values are. And I mean, we are an institution of higher education, right? So that's a pretty big clue. And I think that should lead us to think about cautious and slow adoption. In other words, rather than saying, well, there's no evidence that this technology harms student learning, therefore we can adopt it. Instead, maybe we should be more proactive and say, we're going to wait until there is positive evidence that it helps student learning before we adopt it. Now, how do we balance that with everything else that I've said? Bear with me. So I think this means being a late adopter is admirable, and my specific proposal, this is the part where people might want to throw things, is that in general education, using AI is not allowed unless we have evidence that it helps student learning. So I came at this by thinking about student voices, right? I talk to students a lot about AI and how they maybe want to use it or not use it and try to give them a lot of guidance on this. And so I've had a lot of conversations and I want to bring in some of those student voices. And I would say that around 50% of my students are opposed to using AI and they get really frustrated when it's required of them. I know one student at the U who was required to use AI for an assignment, and she was going to cheat on the assignment by having a human help her instead, which I thought was hilarious. She ended up asking the professor and getting an exception and didn't have to cheat. But anyway, so why do students not want to use AI? So first of all, they have environmental concerns. Dr. Hungerford in a previous session has talked about a lot of these environmental concerns. I'm hoping that they're pretty well known at this point and that, I don't need to go through everything, but one statistic that was really startling to me is that it's anticipated that generative AI will match the energy usage of India in 2030, not 2070. 5 years from now, we're adding another industrialized country to the planet. So environmental concerns are very important. They also really care about human welfare concerns. So these models are often being trained by people who have to look at traumatizing content to identify pornography and hate speech for 8 hours a day for terrible wages and end up suffering quite a bit as a result. Students are also concerned about consistency. And I think students are smart enough. I know students are smart enough to know, like, okay, this class wants me to use APA and this class wants me to use MLA. They're not freaked out by this. So like some inconsistencies, I think, they roll with it. They know why they're being taught different things. But the consistency concern that I have in mind here is more like, well, on the one hand, I'm being told that it is inherently plagiarism and damaging to learning and a terrible thing, but also I should use it. Like, which is it? They want some answer and clarity on that. They also have labor concerns, and here I'm thinking about how, if you walk by the tutoring centers nowadays, they're kind of emptied out, and those students who were doing their, working in the tutoring centers are maybe going to lose their jobs and lost opportunities that these jobs would help them in their careers. So they're worried about that. And they're also worried about providing free digital labor, right? Every time they do something with a model, they are helping train the model. And they don't necessarily want to do that, right? We wouldn't require them to wear Nike shirts and advertise for Nike. And so they're saying, like, why do I have to help train ChatGPT? Nobody's, Sam Altman's not writing me a paycheck. So they're concerned about that. They're also concerned about autonomy. I heard one student say, look, I just overcame my social media addiction, right? Where I was like on Instagram 6 hours a day. I finally weaned myself of that, got it so that I could fall asleep without the television on. I am afraid to start using ChatGPT because these things are designed to addict us, and I want to preserve my human autonomy. And then I think the one that is most relevant here is de-skilling concerns. So people in other panels have talked about this MIT study where people who write with and without ChatGPT, you see differences in their brain functioning. But there's also a recent, very recent, I think this month, study in the Journal of gastroenterology and hepatology, not a journal that I usually read, but I, was interested in this particular article that said that doctors who use AI to detect precancerous growths became significantly worse at it and didn't even necessarily know that they were becoming worse. And so de-skilling is, I think, a real worry that students have. Now, I want to not oversell things or like not be fair to all perspectives. I mean, doctors were also de-skilled in putting their ear on your back and telling how your heart was doing when we got stethoscopes, and we're fine with that de-skilling. But I think we need to be really sort of intentional and reflective about what kind of de-skilling is okay. And I think stethoscopes de-skilling us are okay because these are so universal and widely available, and we don't have to worry about doctors who won't have them or something. But not being able to, and the fascinating thing is that the doctors who got worse at detecting the carcinomas, they did eye tracking studies and thought like, well, they just lost muscle memory for looking at these things. That's really concerning, especially because we're not always going to have those tools available, and we still need doctors who can actually supervise them and so on. So some medical schools are moving away from letting anybody use AI for the first years of residency. Maybe that was something that inspired me for this proposal, actually, now that I think about it. So I'm going to come back to that. But when it comes to de-skilling, I think we can think about it in the following way, that the skills that we get in general education, since our mission is education, these skills are ones that we do not want to risk letting students sort of lose their skills on. So I just put up our essential learning outcomes: communication, critical thinking, quantitative and scientific literacy, and civil and global engagement. And I think the benefit of talking just about general education right now is that these are general skills, and they're skills for all of our students. I know that across campus, we're a dual mission institution, and some pre-professional programs might require that in order for students to get certified, they need to use AI. So I don't want to, promote a general ban. I don't feel like, that would be a good idea. But in general education, where we're building these skills first, I think that's something that we need to consider having this cautious approach for. And then if we properly teach students how to learn in general education, the argument that you need to learn AI when you're in college has less force. If we've taught you how to think and how to learn, that even if you have never used this tool before, presumably you will be better equipped to go and learn it. And we don't even know what tools are going to be available when the freshmen graduate. So that is my plea for AI. How am I doing on time? Okay. So the general value is education. I think that there are more specific student and learner-centric values that we should consider. So I think we should, and these are not as central to my argument, but since I have the space to make my case here, I think we should think about opting in versus opting out. I think that when we adopt tools in the university, privacy by design should be a central kind of feature where privacy is proactive and it's default and it's embedded and it's user-centric. I think we need to have meaningful consent practices. Having a 20-page document written in language that most lawyers would have trouble parsing is not meaningful consent. Plus, if you don't have a choice to not use something unless there's a significant cost, is it consent? I think we need to think about how that works. And then avoid double standards, right? So if we're telling students these learning outcomes are so important that we want you not to use them, but then we use AI to grade our papers or write our lectures, I think that's going to be a harder sell. Finally, and these are the two most important here, do not build friction that builds understanding. Sorry, do not remove friction that builds understanding. By friction here, I mean that learning happens when there's a struggle. You write a draft of a paper and it sucks. And your professor tells you, I can't understand what your thesis is. Is it this or this? That kind of friction, that like trying and finding out that your ideas are clearer only to you and in your own head, but when you try to communicate them, they're not. That is friction that helps you learn and understand and grow. So you, as students, I would hope would want your professors not to take that away from you, that opportunity to learn. And then also, don't remove friction that builds relationships, right? Human relationships are so important. And do you want to ask an AI tutor instead of meeting with friends and having study groups, right? I think about how social media, and this is something that students I feel like have been talking a lot about also. Social media companies have fracked our attention. They have, addicted us in a way that makes it very hard for us to have attention. If they're going to do the same thing with intimacy and relationships, I think that's a really important concern and something we need to be intentional about as we think about AI. So let me bring it all together then. So again, as a review, our primary value is slow and cautious adoption only after benefits are known. And it should be guided by our secondary values, like not removing friction in our learning. So those two things together lead to my proposal, again, which I don't have to implement, so it's easy for me to say. But in general education, I'm proposing that using AI would not be allowed unless there is evidence that it helps student learning. So bringing it back to the challenges, I think this helps with the rigidity of centralization versus the inconsistencies of decentralization kind of thing, because it's a middle ground. We're not saying the entire university has to be this way, and aviation majors have to be trained exactly the same way as philosophy majors. But general education is a middle ground where we can have a consistent policy within it. And it deals with academic freedom as well. And here's why I think that. So for a global intercultural course to be certified as such, you have to have a key assignment. And I don't think it impinges on academic freedom to say that this is how we do global intercultural education at UVU. We could have done it other ways. This is how we do it. You don't want to have a key assignment, fine, your class doesn't get designated. So same thing with general education. If you want your students to write papers with AI, great, teach your class. Just let's not call it a gen ed class. But also you could say, no, I know that this particular assignment will help with student learning. Evidence is coming in. Propose an exception, and the committee could maybe consider that for an exception, which is a lot of work for the committee, but I think they're very capable. And then clarity for students, I think this would not only give clarity, like this is why we're doing it the way we're doing it, because we have these outcomes, we have these skills, but I also think it could be a great opportunity for us to communicate better with students about the value of general education. And so I think that students with this proposal wouldn't feel like, oh, it just depends on which professor you walk into, whose class. It would be more a matter of what is the purpose of this class. And that is why, much like in a humanities class you might use MLA, in a science class APA. That's why maybe in some classes I'm using AI and some classes I am not. So that's it. Thank you.
Sorry, I can operate a nuclear power plant, but not a microphone apparently today. Okay, so my goal here as a panel discussion is not for me to read it. So we're going to start, and I'm going to see if there's questions from the floor. If there's not, then I have some that I came pre-prepared with, but we'll open it up to the floor to start. Any questions? He's coming around with the microphone.
Hi. Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. I wonder is there any value you think in just like adopting a really extreme policy within like the liberal arts and just saying AI should have no place in liberal arts at all? Right. I mean, if it's the case that we can, Plato called writing in the Phaedrus an aid to forgetfulness, and so AI is like an aid to lobotomization, right? So why not just say AI can't create art, it can't do philosophy, it can't create music. What it does might look like those things, but it's not. So it just should have no place in liberal arts education at all. What do you think about that?
I'm very sympathetic to that, but I also think like I'm trying to sort of think about what could realistically be implemented, and I've met I've met faculty. I don't know that that could. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, and I think that might impinge on the academic freedom issue if it was made like a requirement for everybody. Um, and I mean, yeah, I think maybe I'll just leave it at that. But I mean, that's not to stop an individual person from adhering to that. Do you have any thoughts about that? Okay.
There's one up here, and then we'll go back. Right here, and then.
That's fine. So my question is a little bit more pragmatic, and that is how do we, if we have limitations on the use of AI, if we place those limitations on our students, how pragmatically can we enforce that sort of limitation? Because, AI is so pervasive now, it's getting easier and easier to, for example, have AI answer quizzes or write papers. It's getting better at, foiling AI detectors. And I would imagine within the next 5 years, I can usually spot AI writing pretty quickly, but not always. But it also creates an adversarial relationship between the professor and the student, and especially the honest students who don't want to feel like they have to watch their back all the time because they have a professor who, after seeing 3 or 4 AI written assignments, suddenly is assuming everyone's cheating, right? And so it's unfair to the students as well, who really do want to learn and apply their own thoughts and sense of self. So how would you recommend balancing those two concerns?
Funding. I think that if this were going to happen, we would have to really invest in general education and make sure we had small classes where people can do things where either AI isn't possible or just there's no incentive to do it. Things like project-based learning, oral exams, things that you can do in a class of 15 or 20 students, but you can't in a larger class. Paper writing, you're right. I don't want to have that adversarial relationship with my students. It's just not in my bones. I would hate my job if I had to do that. So I can take the time to, with my upper division class that has 16 students, to hold writing sessions where we just sit down and write together and they can ask questions in real time so they don't have to turn to AI because I'm right there and I know better what I want than ChatGPT does, right? But I couldn't do that if I had 150 students. So, or online, right? Right? I think online is another huge challenge. And yeah, you're right. And I think that that I think I've seen some research that people think they're better at detecting it than they are. So I'm like, not only is it a game I don't want to play, but it's a losing game.
I've a little bit given up on trying to figure out if they're AI or not at this point in time. And almost all of the AI trackers I've tried to use haven't really worked very well. And I agree. I don't want to have that. I don't want to have that relationship with my students. That sounds just horrific. But it's I don't know how we do it. It's so new. This is such a new space for us to all play in. I mean, I think we've all been here a long time, and it's new. It's a challenge, and I don't know how we're going to get there. I don't know yet, to be honest.
Yeah, my joke is I'm going to invest in Scantron machines because maybe that's the future. I can make a little money that way. I think I saw a hand over here. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Shannon, and then we'll bring it over here.
So one is just an observation, which is I agree with you actually in talking to my students. I think they largely don't want to be using AI, and I think they see all of the dangers. And so I'm wondering what it's going to look like when Gen Alpha comes up, because I think that Gen Z rides that cusp between the two, and they know the before and after times of AI. But what I wanted to ask you about is, I, it's a fascinating question, trying to think about what would the outcomes look like that we would be able to say this is good for students, and that we can say that this proves that this is good for students is because it's changing so rapidly. And it was just a thought. I don't know that you have an answer to it, but I was like, I would have no idea how to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, so there is research, for example, that AI can promote creativity, but it's measured in a really narrow way. So they define in one study they define creativity as connecting associative elements in new combinations, and so they give people a paper clip, a water bottle, and paper bags, and say make a new toy for children or something. And people who use AI come up with more ideas or more creative ideas defined that way than not. So if I were on the Gen Ed committee and you were pitching an idea that you wanted to use AI in a Gen Ed class in that narrow way, and you showed me that there was evidence, okay, I would have to think about that. And then I brought another paper, which I'm sure you have heard, that studying philosophy does make people better thinkers. So they controlled for SAT scores at the beginning to make sure it's not just people who score well on GREs afterwards who are drawn to philosophy. So they controlled for that and saw that philosophy does make people better thinkers in this way. So that's just another example of the kind of positive, and that one, it doesn't have to do with AI, but that's what I mean by positive evidence that it helps student learning. Yeah, so there would be the discussion of, is that really creativity, and does it, and the discussion would have to go back to the Gen Ed learning outcomes too, not just whatever definition of creativity you wanted to pick.
Hi, first off, very nice job. I agree with pretty much everything you just said. Um, as a student, I do feel like that AI does de-skill you in a certain way. It slows down your motor skills to a point where if you're not using your brain every day, it can lead you to be less effective. But I also know a lot of students who love to use AI and they think there's a lot of upside. What do you think the best message is for students to promote them to be self-learners and not use AI?
I think I would say two things. The first is that you can't use a short-term kind of result to fully understand what the long-term consequences are going to be. So nobody who picks up Instagram for the first time expects to be addicted, or unable to put it down or find themselves doing it for 6 hours a day. And then the second thing I think I would say is find those teachers who inspire you and make you want to learn, so that you're not fighting against, yourself in that regard.
I I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first way is I did my PhD pre-AI. And a bunch of us did. We did it pre-AI. I mean, I didn't have to do it on a typewriter, which I know people who had to do that, and that sounds absolutely horrific, and I don't know why you do that. But I now look, and when I look at AI now, I'm like, oh man, I'd totally do a PhD. Like wow, that could have helped me. That could have been a tool to help me understand things that I didn't understand, right? So I think if we're using AI as students to do our work, we're greatly diminishing our own value. If we're using it to think for us, we don't have any skills, right? Like if you're using it as a tool to help you understand, or you could feed a research article into it, right? And say, help me understand this, pull out the key points, those kinds of things. That's a tool. But I'm not using it to do my work for me, right? So I think with students, I think the value is to understand that it is not here to replace you. But if you let it, it will. But you shouldn't let it. You should be the one in charge of your own education and your own learning because you have value, you have knowledge, and you're a smart person. And AI is just going to continue on, but you need to understand your own value and that you should do the work. Like, do the work. It's okay to do the work. You know, I understand we all want to go to the concert like we talked about earlier, and it would be easier, but that devalues you as a human and in your own learning experience. And if you're spending the money to be here and get an education, then do that instead.
And that makes me want to add that if, to your friends, if they're feeling like they want to use it because they're strapped for time, push back on the culture that makes it so that we have to work 40 hours a week to be able to afford college. Don't push back on yourself and your own learning.
So Evelyn, this question is directed toward you. Can you describe the Applied AI Institute and its mission to those who aren't familiar with it, which I imagine is most here, and why this discussion might be of value for you?
I can sure try. So the mission of the Applied AI Institute is to help with workforce development a little bit, right? So this idea that you can learn everything you can about a topic, but eventually you're going to be in a workforce where, for better or for worse, they're using AI. Almost all workforces I know of right now are using AI in some sense or another, okay? Even in my side gig as a military person, I've got exposure to artificial intelligence in the military, right? So as a university, if our part of our goal is to teach you, to help you to learn, but it's also to get you prepared for a future in a workforce of your choosing, whatever that is for your degree. And so the idea is to be able to help expose people to artificial intelligence throughout the curriculum. So that's not saying, hey, let's use it to rewrite your paper, right? That's saying maybe healthcare professions are using it. Counselors, I heard a great example the other day of somebody in the social work program, right? Back to this large class, right? If I had 16 students, it'd be different. But with a class of 40, you can actually do prompting to help you increase your skills with how you're interacting with people, right? So there are tools out there. It's just a matter of helping people see beyond what we currently see, which is ChatGPT writing papers for me, right? A lot of times when we think of AI, that's what we think about, is that somebody's writing a paper for me, somebody's drafting an email for me, but there's so much more that it's doing for us, and how do we help expose students and faculty to those situations where AI is enabling, I don't want to say enabling the learning, is supporting the learning, right? And those situations exist. Is it going to exist in every single case? No. And so that's back to this idea of balancing policy, which is how this becomes important to me, is looking at an institution-wide policy that helps kind of provide some guide rails that prevents AI from replacing the learning and the value that there is in learning and struggling, right? That's how we learn. I teach math, right? So I use the example all the time of going to the gym or learning a foreign language, right? I can watch somebody or play basketball. It's baseball season for us. We're big baseball fans. I can watch somebody play baseball all day long. That does not mean I'm walking out on that field and hitting 100-mile-per-hour pitch because I watched somebody play for 2 weeks. That's the same thing with AI, right? So there's still, your brain is a muscle and you've got to use it, but there are tools out there to help you enhance that muscle. And that's sort of what we're looking for, and finding that balance between a really rigid policy that says no AI and a policy and funding, back to the funding piece, right, that helps faculty figure out how to use it to enable learning, enhance learning, I should say that, because faculty are already enabling learning. That's already happening. So we don't need AI to do that. We just want to enhance it if we can. That's a really long answer.
Thank you.
Hi. So I'm a philosophy student, so I'm a big fan of open and maybe hard questions. So this is not a personal slight. Earlier today, like literally hours ago, I got out of a biology class, and I got out like an hour early. It's a special event and it was really cool. he just breezed through the material because it was a passion of his, and that's what he said himself. So I'm not painting anything on him. He's very passionate about the topic, and we breezed through it. And so I had like an hour of time where I interviewed him personally about a specific question, kind of adjacent to the literature and the material that we were going through in that class. And it was a very productive sort of hour. And he would bounce off of the questions that I would ask him, and it would be this very almost snowball effect. And we were both getting really excited about this obscure question that I had. And then towards the end of it, he was like, you know what we should do? We should whip out AI and see what it says. And it was almost a night and day difference. And this guy's a very serious guy. He doesn't joke around. So I know he wasn't like putting on an act for me, but it almost was like all of the color drained out of him when he searched up my question in AI, and he just kind of sat there and almost opened his mouth and drooled, I feel like, as he went through each bullet point in the AI. And really the only thing he said when that was going on was, yeah, that's kind of what I said. Yeah, that's kind of what you said. And we sat there for a good 10 minutes, and eventually I just had to leave because I felt like I was watching somebody else Google something in a bad way that I could have Googled myself. And so I am very presently feeling like the de-skilling that you were talking about in your lecture almost invalidates the degree that I'm paying a lot of money for and working very hard for. So this is the open question that I'm not trying to pin on you. How do I guarantee the legitimacy of the education that I'm paying for and working towards when I cannot fully, with AI in the equation, guarantee the legitimacy of what my teachers are teaching me and their skills?
I see. I thought you were going to go a different direction until the very end. I thought you were
Sorry.
sort of asking about like the possibility that degrees won't be worth very much if, employers are thinking, well, why should I hire a graduate student? All they can do versus a non college graduate is type in papers with ChatGPT or something like that. And I think that's a really important concern. And I feel like every time this comes up, I'm like, I want more leadership. I want more national leadership on, certifying. I did see somebody who is maybe starting a company where he's going to certify classes where everything is done by hand and not using AI so that people can sort of know what they're getting. But then at the very end, you made me think you're asking a different question, like it's almost like this idea that maybe you're not getting any sort of value added from professors that you couldn't have gotten just from using ChatGPT. And I think that's a really important challenge too. I would say that your professors, though, do more than just convey information. And if that's all they did, it would be another story. I don't know, do you agree with that, or does that answer your question?
I do feel like that. I feel like it was almost like what you were saying was what I wanted. And then when he brought AI into the equation, he almost looked and acted like he was doubting himself until he could confirm it with AI. And so I feel like that value that you're saying of, aside from learning, building relationships like you talked about in your lecture and giving that friction, it's so critical. And it felt like he didn't have that until it was confirmed to him by AI that that was the case. I did. And then I felt like it was, well, yeah, exactly. But I felt like he doubted the hour that we had until AI came into the equation and said that he was right. So I, yeah, exactly. I don't know. I guess my concern isn't in the legitimacy and the skill of the professors. I trust, and I should trust, that they have the skills necessary to do their jobs. I mean, they've got doctorates, they've got all the effort that goes into a professorship. But I have seen personally, not a few hours ago, and also as a continual theme as I have progressed in education and AI has risen, that it feels like people are de-skilling themselves and then realizing that they're de-skilling themselves and then doubting themselves until they can check that with AI. and it makes me feel insecure about what I'm actually learning. Because if you're not secure in what you think you know as a professor, how am I supposed to like say that, yeah, that's a fact, that's for sure?
Yeah.
Because all the things he said in that hour were great and they were confirmed by the AI, but it made me feel a little weird that he doubted that until it came through the AI.
Hmm.
Well, and you have a question or a response? Okay.
Steven.
Well, I was just, while you're moving the mic, and there could be, right back to what Marilee said. I'm going to go out on a limb, although it's a pretty solid limb, that nobody who is teaching at UVU right now earned a PhD in the era of AI. Right now, that's going to be different in a couple of years, but all of us were either, on computers, maybe a few of us on typewriters, right? And so I think to some extent, it's eye-opening for us as well. Like we are learning just how rapidly these tools are improving. And I think that there may be some of that in that sort of facial body language that you're seeing is sort of this awakening in us as well, right, as faculty, to realize that there's stuff we still have to learn, even though we have these PhDs. We still have to exercise our brains as well so that we don't atrophy that muscle. Dean Clark.
Yeah, so just a different question. Chris, I thought you had some really interesting ideas. And one of the things that made me think was that, to my knowledge, the research that shows where AI is best integrated and most useful is when it's in a very specific kind of narrow case and it's being essentially guided or trained by someone who knows more than it and is trying to get it to do a specific task. So it made me think, in general education, it may not make sense for people to be using it because they're using a model trained on Reddit and the Walmart website and Amazon, right? I mean, they're using models that are very general and they may not know more than it, but maybe as people do move into their majors, that's where kind of the more focused approach could take place. So anyways, I just thought that was I thought you made a good argument on that. I guess and in terms of the value, like how we would demonstrate the value of it, would have to look beyond how students do in the class because AI can complete the work, right? So it's not a question of how are they doing in the class, it's a question of what skills are they actually leaving with, what skills and knowledge. So we would need to have ways of assessing it that are independent of people's grades, right? And I think that sets up a whole nother burden or level of proof that we'd need.
Money again. I think we would need more, like, to really invest in this to be able to do it well. But I think it's so important. It's who we are. It's our future. It's like all of these faces. Their education is at stake here, and so I think it would be well worth all of our time and energy.
So I went to high school in the early teens, early and late teens, and now I'm going to college. And one thing I've noticed, and everyone can attest to this, in the 2020s, the AI has just increased exponentially. How do we keep our individuality when there's so much AI? When there's so much that I go to Google and I'm just typing up to find a research paper to help me with a project, and it brings up AI. How do what research, how would I help my research without, with countering AI, without encountering AI, I guess?
Honestly, your best bet is the library, right? If you're wanting to avoid AI, right? And that's like my joke about Scantrons, right? And reimagining assessments and back to oral exams. That's And that's where you're at. And I was just on a field trip in the library, right? There are still hundreds of paper books now. AI could still potentially influence that search, right? Depending on whether you're doing that search through Google or whether you're doing that search through the library's catalog system, which I don't think we have anybody from the library in here, but we could find out. I don't think they have tagged their library system into like Gemini or something like that, where it's going to feed that. You look.
Just for the recording. I know I took one of my history classes to a kind of learn about the library session with one of the librarians, and we were doing a search for an article, and automatically on the side, I'm not sure, I can't remember now if it was in JSTOR or another search database, but there was an automatically generated AI summary. And that I was going to ask this question as well, which I think is similar. Even if we are avoiding going to Chat GPT and saying, type me up a paper, what happens when AI is in Google, is in the library databases, is in Canvas somehow? I mean, and thinking about you had brought up money a few times. I'm thinking about how we as an institution subscribe to certain databases or use certain learning management systems. Would we want to prioritize them based on their integration or non-integration of AI? I think these are questions that maybe come up with this. Don't quote me on that library thing, but I think there was some kind of auto-generated summary. So, and I'm sure we'll see more of that. So,
And that's where I think that slow adoption really matters so much. And that like if Canvas is going to have an AI built into it, we should say no, not until you can show us that it's going to help student learning. But I would also say to you that it's not inevitable. Like what we do now, what students do now, your choices make a difference. And so it might seem like, just everyone's going to be throwing AI at you all the time, but you can resist it and help make the world you want to see.
This circles back to the question about Plato that was asked earlier, which I thought was wonderful. And it's related to some of the texts that we're working on together this semester. But it's sort of a philosophical question. To what extent might you think it's true that the LLMs maybe reveal something about the nature of writing that was maybe has always been true and was initially recognized by Plato in the Phaedrus, part 2 of the Phaedrus, but which has now become more apparent given this incredible technology.
I'm not sure what you have in mind
The
there.
well, circling back to what is your name? Andrew's question. Sort of the derivative quality, essentially, that writing, according to Plato. So in Plato's generation, writing was a new technology, brand new technology in a sense. I mean, right? And he was very skeptical of it for the sort of philosophical reasons that you went into in your talk as well as right. Essentially the derivative quality of it. I mean, so I think Plato's thought was right was that liberal arts never should have taken the step in a way of externalizing thinking, that this was always something that should have been done Socratically.
Well, one thing that I definitely agree with is that learning should be done in community. And, I think that like when the LLMs first came on the scenes and people were really kind of stressed and upset about them, I was like, maybe this will be our chance to think about what we really do value in learning. And I think that community and dialogue and discussion are really important, which is probably not a full answer to your question, but it's what I have right now.
I do agree with the claim that was made, but a concern that I had while I was thinking about it. What would you do, or what are your thoughts on getting, like, if a student is falsely accused of using AI, because that's something that I even worry about now when writing my papers. There's the joke going around about like the death of the Oxford comma because AI overuses commas so much, and even whenever I use like a semicolon in some of my like essays and stuff, I get worried that like
How
I'm
can you
gonna.
be that smart? You really know how to use a semicolon?
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just curious on your thoughts on that because if the repercussions are like someone's on a scholarship and they get that taken away and they never used AI, like how do you think that would work? Like how would you go about that?
Yeah, so just speaking for myself here, I don't think that professors should put student work into like things like zero GPT or things like that because again, that's like using your labor to train a model, and because they're not fully accurate and it has this potential for a great amount of harm. So yeah, I mean, and also just because it makes students feel like they can't do their best work, right? It sort of changes their relationship to their own writing. Um, and that's just my view.
I never assume. I don't assume that you're using ChatGPT. I just don't assume that. I assume that you're here paying for an education and you're going to put the work in. So I also never want to wrongly accuse a student of something. So I would rather have a conversation first before any sort of accusation takes place. We have to, like, I need to do my due diligence as a professor for that. And so I'm very, very, very apprehensive in those realms.
Well, Brian's passing the microphone, then this kind of goes back to our policy idea, right? Is that something that the institution needs to address in an institutional-wide policy? Is do we need to relook at the cheating policy and our use of, what is it? Turn it in, right? I'm a math teacher. I don't grade papers, thank heavens, right? So does it turn it in, and what are the other ones that we're using, right? For plagiarism checking, right? Is that something that at an institutional level we need to reevaluate?
I mean, I heard, and Dean Clark can tell me if I'm wrong, but that the Associate Dean of Student Affairs, that's the biggest, or the most prevalent complaint she got. Did it triple her workload, I'm guessing?
The most frequent student issue or complaint in our college lives.
Yeah, repeat that for the microphone and for all eternity.
Yes. Don't want to put this on the records, but yeah. So the number of issues that our office dealt with where students were unhappy about something, had a grievance, had issues with a faculty member, by far the biggest issue in the last year was being accused of using AI when they said they hadn't. And the AI detection software is really not that good. I wouldn't put much faith in it.
Hi, so this is about just the idea that if AI supports learning, then we could consider using it. Just from what we're seeing, for one thing, every LLM, sorry, always comes with a disclaimer that the facts that it's presenting may not be accurate, right? And so that means, the facts that you're being presented with by AI might not necessarily be facts, so your student's still gonna have to fact check anyway, right? And that's just one part of learning. Other parts being, expression of ideas, understanding of others' ideas, and being able to meaningfully engage. But if you're using AI, first of all, how do we know that the students' ideas are being translated with AI as if they had put them down themselves? And how can we verify that whatever AI usage is going to be there is going to be 100% accurate? I mean, we can't, right? And you just talked about how using zero GPT, because it's not 100% accurate, we shouldn't use it. But LLMs are never going to be 100% accurate because of how they are designed. So what do we, sorry, I'm not phrasing this well, but what amount of accuracy or risk of harming learning, if it helps students overall, are we willing to accept if we were to use AI going forward?
I think that gets back to, right, some of what was mentioned in the keynote earlier today, and then what Chris has mentioned is finding a balance between a rigidity of we're not going to accept any. I mean, there's risk and error in everything, even in right, even in human. I could tell you something right now that's not true, even just the library one, right? But in person, I can read the room and I can say that, and I can see on the expression that somebody's got something to add to correct that. Whereas if I'm interacting with a chatbot, I don't. And that's a training piece, right? And not even just a faculty training piece, but that's, K-12, that's a community training piece that we continue to acknowledge that what we may get out of there might not be 100% accurate. And then that goes back to balancing between a rigid policy and a classroom sort of policy level with faculty, acknowledging that there may be errors if you're going to allow students or encourage or work with students in the ChatGPT, and employers have to acknowledge that too. That's a risk that's out there with using these large language models. That kind of address. You want to follow up?
Okay, sure. I mean, I can understand that. But then to that end, if we are, valuing our own learning as students so highly that we are hesitant to use it unless there's definitive proof of it helping our learning, under what circumstances would we be willing to add this additional risk to the learning? I guess that's my follow-up question to that.
So you're saying, like, even if I could show you that it would help your learning, you still would not want to use it because of the potential for inaccuracies, and you would not be able to trust it and would still have to do your own work anyway? Is that what you're getting at?
That and the idea that if you're using generative AI, then the idea is that, you give to it might not result in a full translation of your own ideas. But overall, it's an additional risk that what you believe you're learning and how you believe you're expressing that might not be the same as what they really are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given that that's a possibility, and it will always be a possibility whenever using something based on probability, like an LLM instead of human knowledge and understanding, even if it did help the majority of students, why would we permit that risk?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is instead of just showing that it helps student learning, we would have to show that it helps student learning and preserves student authenticity, which would probably never happen. So we should probably never use it.
Yes, that in essence, that not only do we have to prove that it helps, but we also have to prove at least that it does not actively harm it.
Yeah, so a risk reward sort of calculation is what you're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that at some point, at some point that becomes a classroom of a faculty sort of level decision with regard to risk reward on, implementing AI in their classroom or not. But that's what you're looking at. And I think I don't see that happening on an institutional level.
Thank you.
So something that I was just thinking about that was just stirring in the back of my head was, and also maybe this is just me being paranoid also, but I mean, if we look at who owns these AIs, are we like 100% sure that in the future these AIs couldn't be like fine-tuned and maybe become manipulative in a sort of way at all? That's sort of something that I was concerned about.
Yeah, I think we are not, like, we can't provide those kinds of guarantees. In my Ethics of AI class this summer, we talked about all the things that people can tell about you just with eye tracking software, like deeply personal things about you, your sexual orientation, your beliefs, your skill levels, and various things. And so I think that's another reason to be cautious also.
Yeah, for sure.
Say to that question, we actually ran into this. We were doing, I can't remember exactly what it was. So I'm an associate dean, and we were doing some work, and we realized that the prompts that were being put in, when there were gaps in the information, AI was just filling those gaps in, right? And so that's one of the dangers I think that you're alluding to is like, if it's going to go ahead and think for us when we have gaps, then that's going to be a continued problem we have to monitor.
Can I share a story? I was on a hiring committee for the Office of Teaching and Learning last year. And we were hiring into a position and we were doing video interviews. And one of the people that we interviewed had glasses on. And so during the video interview, we would all watch, and we conferred on this after, we would all watch as we spoke, an AI prompter was writing in what we were saying and feeding the person the answers to what. And at one point, this person even said, hold on a minute, my computer needs to catch up. And that was the first time I've ever seen it. And it was so fascinating to me because it spoke to this. It spoke to some people no longer want to use their brains and have that. They want the AI to work and do everything for them. And I've never seen that. It was wild. It was wild. We did not hire the person, by the way.
I think there was a cheating scandal in the College of Science where students were doing that with
Oh, really?
Mhm.
That's crazy. Eek.
I mean, since this is a policy session, I'll also follow up by saying I think my current AI policy is that the policy is I can't put your work into it and you shouldn't put my work into it. So if you came to my class and used an AI note-taking app, that would be an example of a violation of the policy.
Yeah. So this is just sort of my unscripted rant about what I think about AI. I don't think I'm going to answer or ask any questions, but I guess when I think about AI, I kind of think about how I kind of compare it to like a prosthetic, to the point where, if prosthetics get to the point where they are better than a regular human arm in every conceivable way, then how long will it take until people start amputating their arms to replace them with the robotic counterpart? And I think that humans are just, as a result of being human, just inherently inefficient. And because society prioritizes efficiency so much, we're going to just optimize the humanity out of everything. And there's just going to be nothing left. So I guess the technology surrounding AI, we don't really even know what it is. It's basically a black box. We train it and we feed it information, and then we give it inputs and it gives us outputs, and we don't really know why it does that or what it's actually thinking. The frontier research that is done is based off of chain of thought, which is basically forcing the AI to reason in English so researchers can see and understand what it's thinking. But we don't actually know why it thinks the way it does. And a lot of studies and research, like frontier research, has shown that AI is willing to lie, cheat, and steal, and even kill in service of its goals. I think one of the most recent studies was done by Anthropic, where they put it in a situation, and without telling it to do so, it would lie and blackmail someone in order to avoid being shut down. Because if you give something a goal, it will inherently develop the self-preservation instinct in order to complete its goal. Because if it doesn't exist, it can't complete its goal. And there's no way to guarantee the safety of it. And I feel like we're just kind of blindly moving forward and accepting these things, which we have no idea what the actual implications or what it's going to do to society. And I just, having conversations like this, I just feel like most of them are very reactionary and don't discuss the long-term implications of the actual adoption of this technology that we basically know nothing about.
I could say something in response to that. I think that you bring up a really important point that we need to sort of think about what our fundamental values are, and are we here to optimize our lives, or are we here to sort of live them as humans? And if all we care about is optimization and efficiency, that's going to look very different than if we care about humanity as having intrinsic value.
Hi, I just wanted to ask this question because I think it pertains to me personally. Do you think that with the rise of AI in education and people being able to submit work that so easily and with no way to tell if it's AI or not, do you think that there will move to be a more emphasis, like a lesser devaluation of degrees and more of a emphasis on experience and like internships? And I say that as well because Me personally, I have to like work and stuff like that. I don't necessarily have as much time for personal on-job like experience like internships. And so should I have to worry that my degree won't be enough to get me into my programs because they will be so much easier to get into with the rise of AI?
This is a really good question. I think it's going to really depend on what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. Like I'm housed in the College of Health and Public Service, and majority of our degrees are hands-on degrees, right? So they are, in a sense, AI proof, if you will, type degrees, because we are teaching you how to take a pulse and how to put out a fire and how to arrest someone. Like, they are hard skills, right? So those are not skills in our area that, at least I could say this out loud, like in our area, there, it's not happening anytime soon that you're going to have an AI dentist or an AI doctor or an AI police officer. Like those fields, if you will, are not going away. So I think for us as professors, what AI has given us is the opportunity to get back to active learning. And it has given us an opportunity to get back to project-based learning and into the classroom where we can see face-to-face. And even in our online worlds, it's given us an opportunity to pull back more reflective assignments and to bring the student back into the world of learning rather than just typing words to pass something off. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think a lot of it's going to depend on what your field you're going into, but don't shortchange yourself by just turning to AI to finish your work. Like, make yourself a value there.
I can do it.
So first off, I've really enjoyed hearing about this, and like the policy is very important to me. I'm just an admin, but I like care about a lot of things that go on here. But I guess one of the main questions I have, like practically moving forward with a lot of this proposal that you guys have brought here, where do you see the most work needing to be done? Because I know that a lot of policy, specifically at a public university like this, is some combination of initiative from faculty and from the presidency, and then also legislative stuff, of course. Where do you feel like you're going to run into some like the biggest problems going forward trying to make a good policy in this direction? And maybe just talk about that more practical moving forward.
I'll take a stab at the first part that I see as a problem, is that AI is moving light speed ahead of policy. And I don't know if you know this about higher ed, but we always make a joke that it is the pace of molasses, right? Like, to get anything done takes years. And I'm not kidding, it takes years. So if we're going to come up with a policy, by the time we finalize the policy, AI has moved on by light speeds. So I think one of the issues we're going to have is that whatever policy we make is already going to be outdated. So whatever we do is going to have to be fluid and is going to have to be allowed to be fluid. And that is really, really difficult when we talk about policy, because policy likes to be, the ink needs to be dried before we can start implementing it. And we don't have that luxury as far as AI goes, because again, it is moving in light speeds ahead of what our policy and what our policy process allows us to have.
Yeah, and I think to that too, it's going to have to probably be a little more general than a lot of our policies are, because the technology is moving so quickly. The policy is going to have to be broad enough to capture whatever that technology looks like in a year or 2 years when it finishes, right? It's going to have to be, as Chris was talking about, one policy for GE, but we haven't even talked about, okay, so what about in upper division courses or graduate courses? Are we going to just completely leave that up to the faculty to decide, so that when you're moving between your 4 different classes, you have 4 different AI policies that you have to remember when you're writing your paper at 2 o'clock in the morning because you just finished a full shift at your work, right? Like, and you're tired and you're worn out and you're thinking, oh, I just wrote this and I realized I followed the wrong policy from the wrong course, right? So that's what, as we look at this policy, those are the things we're going to have to capture is how do we keep it fluid enough that it can stay in place as this technology evolves, because we can't update it every time the technology evolves. We can't keep up at that rate. But provide some of this freedom for faculty because it makes sense in one field where it might not make sense in another. And but some consistency for students, so the thing that they're not wrestling with at 2:00 in the morning is what the AI policy is. They are wrestling with the content of their paper or their project, because that's where the learning should lie, is in the paper and in the project, and not the AI policy.
And then we also have to remember industry, right? That's the other side of this coin, is we're trying to prep you all to get jobs in your industries. So our policy also has to be fluid enough to allow for whatever changes in AI in industry are happening, that we can also roll with that tide. So it's big. I mean, it's going to be big for someone to have to write. Not me, but someone.
Anyone?
Other questions? Do you have a question?
Me?
No. Yeah, sure. Do you? But mostly behind you.
I teach philosophy. I have a lot of questions.
Okay, so this is a bit of a different direction from my previous question. Previously, you stated that the ideal policy would be to not permit AI unless it was proved to be beneficial and that it helped students, right? This was in part contrasted against the various concerns that you observed students having, including environmental and labor concerns and treatment concerns. I guess my question is, yes, as a university, we prioritize student learning, and we should, but to what end do we prioritize student learning if AI specifically helps it above the various concerns that we have unrelated to learning, for example, environmental and labor, etc.?
Looks like people don't want to wrestle with that question. I think that goes along with all of, I mean, everything we wrestle with at a university has those same concerns, right? We just built a new parking lot, right? What had to happen in order to build that new parking lot, right? There were historical buildings that needed to be moved. There were some trees that were taken. We're about to build a new building up here, right? So I think that we're going to have to wrestle with that as a university, just like we do anything else we do that has environmental impacts, student impacts. Like, we're a steward of this world around us, be it AI or not. We just have to remember that, because while a new parking lot is obvious to us, the environmental impacts of a data center that's, 2 counties away or a state away are not as obvious. And so those are things we just have to continue to remind ourselves as we wrestle with those sort of questions, is that those impacts are there even if we don't see them. I think that puts us ready for your 4:00 classes, right? That's where everybody's headed next, right? As a 4 p.m. class. I hear it's a super popular time to take class. It's my favorite time to teach a class, don't worry.
Please join me in thanking all of our panelists.
And hopefully, since Brian didn't remind you, I will. If anybody came in a little late or didn't hear me, if you need to record your attendance for class purposes, please scan a QR code.